Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelsey Sutter, and I'm with the Iowa Pork Producers Association. I'd like to welcome you to our afternoon panel discussion called Pork's Prominence in the Menu and the Meat Case. Today we're going to be talking about food service and retail and what's been going on with pork in those places and what's to come. Hopefully it will be part of the discussion as well. I'm joined today by Joni Bell. Joni manages Great Caterers of Iowa and owns and manages, Great Caterers of Iowa and the Rib Shack, which is both a brick and mortar restaurant and one of the most successful and iconic food stands at the Iowa State Fair. In addition to her multiple food stands that she has lines at all day long, she also manages food service and catering for multiple facilities and events throughout the Iowa State Fair, including backstage food service needs for the grandstands, or maybe not needs, but more so demands. Joni Bell brings a load of experience to this discussion, from catering to restaurant service at the Iowa State Fair. She is dedicated to the traditional Southern-style barbecue, offering slow-cooked meats in barbecue pits over white oak and cherry woods. You can also find her award-winning booth at the Iowa State Fair. In 2015, the Rib Shack won Best New Fair Food with their Ultimate Bacon Brisket Bomb. The Rib Shack offers full-service catering and premium catering with the Great Caterers of Iowa throughout the Des Moines metro area. The robust catering menu serves weddings, graduations, corporate, and social events. We're pleased to have Joni here with us today. In addition, we have Chef James Murray. James is the executive chef and domestic and international business development manager for the National Pork Board and has 40 years experience in the industry. In his role, he manages a broad range of strategic retail accounts by assisting them in designing on-trend pork-based menuing concepts, products, merchandising, and promotions. Before joining the National Pork Board staff in 2012, Chef Murray was a senior innovation chef with Unilever Food Solutions for 15 years and worked as a corporate chef and sausage evangelist for Johnsonville Sausage for 5 years. In 2021, Chef Murray was inducted into the World Masters Chef Society. Thank you both for coming and helping us explore the importance of pork's prominence in the menu and meat case, and perhaps what lies ahead as pork being the protein of choice. So for most of us in the room, I think we're well versed on the production side of our industry. But that next step, what happens to our product when the conversion from muscle to meat happens and it becomes a consumable product, is an important part of the equation, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I've had the pleasure of working with our restaurant and food service committee with Iowa pork producers for more than 10 years now. And our main objective, of course, as a committee is to increase the frequency of pork on menus throughout the state of Iowa in order to grow local demand for our product. We have several programs that help us achieve that, one of which just took place here on Monday to kick off Pork Congress Week, and that was our Iowa Taste Competition for professional chefs. The competition was in demand this year with more than 50 Iowa chefs interested in competing with limited spots available. The competition cut this year was pork blade steak, which is a unique cut that we were encouraging chefs to be creative with. And actually, Chef Murray was served as one of our judges this year. But I want to highlight a different program that Iowa Pork has started, and it's only been going on for a few years. And it takes a deeper dive into connecting pork with chefs. But before I do that, I think that it's important to understand why chefs play such a key role in growing pork's prominence in menu and meat case. And that's because food trends start at restaurants. Everyone in the food service industry, and I'm sure Joni can attest to this, wants to know what that next food trend is going to be. And food trends follow an interesting food cycle known as the menu adoption cycle. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. According to Data Essentials, at least 70% of U.S. consumers indicate that their food preferences are driven primarily by what they encounter on restaurant menus, more so than what they find on grocery store shelves or in a recipe book. Food trends start at restaurants. Now, trends don't just pop up overnight. Oftentimes they take years, but the first stage in the cycle is inception. This is where the idea starts to take place. It's not widely known at this stage, and you can't find it on many restaurant menus. You can find it in typically fine dining or ethnic independence. The next stages are adoption, proliferation, and ubiquity. Ubiquity is when the trend has reached its maturity. It's often watered down by this point, but you can still recognize its roots, and it can be found across all sectors in food service, including quick service and fast food restaurants. Examples of the menu adoption cycle that we have seen with pork in recent years, and I'm sure you all go, oh yeah, pork belly, not something that was widely known 10 years ago. Charcuterie, I really enjoyed when that one took trend because I saw it working with chefs in food service for many years, and now everyone knows what charcuterie is and can pronounce the word correctly. I'm just also going to generalize here and say breakfast. Breakfast is a food trend, and pork has played a key role in that, and that's been a champion for us. So now that we've established chefs play a key role in affecting or inspiring what we eat, the next question becomes, how do we encourage chefs to use pork more often? I want to really quickly tell you about a program that's a joint effort between the Midwest Pork Associations, and it's called the Midwest Pork Summit. Midwest Pork Summit is a professional development event for invited chefs. Each state association helps fund the event and invites their own chefs from their own states to attend. The chefs experience firsthand the supply chain of pork, starting with on-farm education and how pigs are raised today. They learn about pork quality, meat science, fabrication, and of course cooking techniques and menuing ideas, but their biggest takeaway is always how well the pigs are cared for. We have to recognize that earning trust has to be part of the equation in selling and growing demand for our product. And the Midwest Pork Summit is one of the ways Iowa Pork and other state associations are working to do that. And these are just some images from our last event that took place in November. And I want to just really quickly share a quote. We always survey our chefs at the end of the event. The way in which pork has been modernized when it comes to farming and cleanliness in those barns is amazing. If only more people could experience what we did. I'm going to segue to Jim.
What we found in our organization is very much like the Iowa Pork Producers Association. We are producer-led but consumer-driven, and all of our decisions are based upon what we're finding in data and insights out there about consumers and what benefits retailers in their marketing efforts. And so 2022, we topped 47.7 million pounds in pork sales. And that exceeded pre-COVID. COVID, as we all know, was a crazy time. And, demand far exceeded the amount of product that was readily available out there. So our first example would be a local grocery store chain based out of Des Moines. They have 285 to probably 290 now stores across 8 states in the Midwest and going down now into Indiana, and they'll be going down into the Southeast. We did a store test with them of 35 store grind sets versus 35 control stores. And what the grind set is if you look up there, the yellow box, we found through our research and data insights that if we were to put all the grinds together, and that's beef, pork, chicken, turkey, and in certain cases, even plant-based materials, all in one section so people knew where to go find them, then it increased sales across the board. And that's what we found with this shelf space alignment. So if you look there, it's the same basic products. They're all grinds. It's just the format they come in. So the bottom level was Chubb's. The next level up was a particular type of packaging called lid stock. And then from there we went to things that could be prepared in stores and overwrapped on trays in stores. So it might be sausage. It might be just straight ground pork. And now that is rolled out into virtually all the stores that Hy-Vee has. Meyer took a slightly different approach. This is a Michigan-based retailer. What they did is they had an 80-20 grind in their case, but that's it. And we talked to them about expanding their set. And so what they did is they expanded into a different fat to lean ratio. So 90% lean to 10% fat. And then they also changed the format and they went to patties. And now patties is their #1 selling pork item in the stores. Sam's Club, once again, tried a little bit something different. You know, they're a bulk store, that sort of thing. And so they have a 3-pack grind in 151 select clubs across the United States. Tony's Market was an example of how grinds work really, really well in applications. And so grinds as an ingredient. And Tony's is somewhat of a, I would say, predominantly Hispanic market within the Chicagoland area. And it just really took off. And those consumers, particularly Hispanics and African Americans, are somewhat concerned about the health benefits of pork. And so this was able to get them over that worry about it and use it in applications that they could understand. Quick Trip and Quick Star. Once again, La Crosse-based company. Quick Trip everywhere else in the United States, Quick Star here in Iowa. And I think maybe Illinois goes by Quick Star, but 986 locations in 6 states. Now they're doing full service. Not only their hot foods that they've incredibly expanded, but they're also doing cold food, meaning fresh meat that you can take home. And we were able to get the following video on their monitors in the store for a 3-month period. So as you walk in the store, you'll see this playing. It doesn't have any sound, but it just lets people know here's where to go for some recipes, and it's brought to you by U.S. pig farmers. I said I've never seen those bacon wrap 99-cent pork loins look so good as in that image. But when you think about it as an organization, they've totally targeted their customer. You know, if somebody's getting off work, comes home and goes, oh, I can take 3 of those home for less than what it cost me to buy a burger. I'm going to, you know, that's a meal. Kroger, they are soon to be the 2nd largest retailer nationwide. They have 2,726, and that's before their most recent purchases. And this is an example of how we were able to use some email campaigns in order to target lapsed buyers, meaning we want to increase the number of times people come in to buy pork. Fairway. If you've been down walking the floor, you've seen one of these trailers. Iowa Pork sponsored 2 wraps, and they feature Iowa pig farmers, 2 different families, one on either side, and the National Pork Board now is going to do 2 more next year. One of the unique things about this program is they can specify which truck goes across the United States to pick up something. Maybe they're just picking up, in the case of COVID, toilet paper, or they're picking up produce or something like that. But they'll drive it all the way across the country, so you get a mobile billboard going all the way across the country talking about Iowa pork and the families that grow Iowa pork. Okay.
All right, Jim, thanks for sharing some of the retail work that National Pork Board is doing and the insights there about how to help move pork in retail space. Joni, you have a lot of experience, though, in the food service space, basically all types of food service, with your catering business, your food stand at the Iowa State Fair, which is like a marathon of 11 days, right, and your brick-and-mortar restaurant. And I'm sure that there are things that we could learn from each of those, right? But first, go ahead and just tell us about your businesses, tell us how you got into it, and how you really utilize pork in each of them.
So first of all, I grew up on the farm. We raised pigs. So we always supported the pork industry from being very small till now when I'm 58 years old. So anyway, in my industry, we use every piece of pork there is out there, to anything from, the shoulders, the butts, the tenderloins, to the racks, to having them custom built for us as well. And so I feel like we can promote the pork at a very high-end value, the way it's prepared, as far as, we can get a high dollar amount compared to like a beef tenderloin. We produce our pork tenderloins just like it, and people are like, wow, that's so good. What'd you do different? It's all of how it's all prepared and that. So anyway, the way I got into this was I grew up on the farm. We had to learn to cook for ourselves and help out. And so we took over cooking for our parents while they were farming and raising pigs. And so that's how I got into the industry I'm in today.
How did you get into the food stand business at the Iowa State Fair, and how long have you been there?
So I was at Prairie Meadows for 18 years, and we did all the outside vending for them. And I had a lot of people come in and say, how come you're not a vendor at the fair? Well, you have to get on the list. So I got on a list. I waited 11 years to get on the list, and then I finally got in and, proved what I could do with the products that I did want to sell, which are pretty much pork, and I sell probably more pork there than I do anything else. Everybody hears bacon, We do a lot of bacon products there at our stand, and our extra meaty baby back ribs that we specialize in. So I got in there, and I've proved my point, and now I've been able to grow to one of the biggest vendors they have there. So,
do you happen to know between all your businesses how much pork you utilize in a year?
Well, we did look that up for you, and it was 56,000 pounds this year is what we utilized.
In all pork products?
Yes.
And what is your number one selling pork product, or what do you move the most of?
Well, I would say equal of our pulled pork, of course, and then we do, probably an equal amount of the higher-end pork tenderloin. Yeah, a lot of that.
And which cut is your favorite?
The rack of pork. I would take that any day. It's my favorite.
They're all good, right?
Yes, exactly. And we use a lot of ground pork, too, in like different applications, because we actually make our own sausages. We make all of our own, like, carne asada. We do a lot of the Hispanic food, as well. And so we use a lot of that product in that, too, and a lot of different applications that you would never imagine. So,
So you have a really great Hispanic chef on your team, right?
Yes, I do.
And we know in our industry that that's a huge opportunity for pork. Is that something that you see growing locally in Iowa? We obviously know that in other areas, pork demand for ethnic dishes is really high. Is that something you see growing here in the Des Moines Metro?
I do. The boys go out to these different taco trucks during the week just for something different to see what's going on, and they'll come back and Tony will be talking to everybody in the kitchen, telling them, well, this is what they're doing. And so I feel like it is broadening its horizon more with the pork products. Absolutely.
That's great. Jim, can you speak to domestic demand for pork and how it's changed throughout the years, and maybe what you think is coming in the year ahead?
Well, I think what we saw in 2022 was volume is coming back. Dollars are certainly up, but a lot of that has to do with inflation, so that kind of weighs into it. But as you were alluding to, not only are we seeing it, I think it's cycling back through on menus. I do a lot of just because I was in food service for so many years looking at menus, and now I'm seeing a lot of the white tablecloth reinstalling an economical cut of pork as an option. And now I spent a lot of years trying to convince them it doesn't necessarily have to be the cheapest thing on your menu, that sort of a thing. If you got $70 steaks, why are you selling $20 pork chops? You're leaving money on the table, and nobody goes to a restaurant to say, hey, I'm going there and order the cheapest thing on the menu, that sort of thing. But consumers are, if you give them applications in retail, I think they're much more apt to buy your products. And then it's just really effectively merchandising it. And now with all the tools that are available through electronic means, you can geo-target people as they're coming into the store. We're seeing the repetitive purchases are much higher, and the ring per basket for pork consumers is much higher than that of any of the other proteins.
Why do you think that is?
I just think it's a good value, and a lot, if you give them the ideas of how to use it, then they go out and they buy all the peripheral stuff that goes along with it. And we've had things like egg roll in a bowl. You put ground pork with all the ingredients around the outside, and I saw one, it was some salmon dish we have a store called Woodman's, a retail store in Wisconsin. And it was some TikTok video, and they just had like a sheet that said, here's where to find these 8 items, and here's where you get your salmon or whatever, and they couldn't keep salmon on the shelf. You know, people are just hungry for it, and when you put it right in front of them, then you're going to get that sale. Yeah.
So you mentioned ground pork. As an industry, I can remember when I started at Iowa Pork 10, 11 years ago, and everyone in this room, especially if you get your own processing done, everyone's got a freezer full of ground pork, right? We all know that ground pork has always been a great protein option for home cooking. We were having a harder time getting it in the meat case, ground pork, at the retail level, but the disruption in the supply chain really affected our ability to get ground pork prominently placed in the meat case. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I would say that, you know, once we got over that hiccup of supply, it's still a challenge because we have just-in-demand kind of production systems in place. But, you know, we're hopefully on the back side of it. And it's one of those things where you can utilize so many different, and what we talk about, those fat to lean ratios. So is it 90-10? And what we found in our research is that consumers will use those for different things. You know, they will use a 90-10 for something like an ingredient in a taco or something along those lines. 80-20 is probably used in a different application, and then 70-30, which is the lowest lean fat content, that's what they're making their burgers out of, that sort of a thing. And so it's really just showing them the versatility, and people understand grinds. I mean, you know, we probably should come out with pork burger helper, but anybody that grew up eating hamburger helper knew how to make a skillet meal, that sort of stuff with ground beef. Oh, all of a sudden they started using ground turkey, and then when supplies got tight on them and there was available ground pork, they would buy 2 or 3 packages of it, and then what we saw is it really kind of flipped, and people really started coming back and buying it more. It also, in many cases, certainly up against ground beef, it's a lot less expensive. Even during feature ads, it's a lot less expensive than what ground beef is going for.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joni, in the food service industry, you're going to prepare what your consumers are asking for, what your customers are asking for the most. So when it comes to protein, what is the highest competitor for your pork options in your catering business and your food service business? What protein competes the most with pork? What are your consumers asking for?
In the pork industry, what are they looking for? Pork products?
Over pork. What is the highest competitor? Chicken?
A lot of chicken, yeah. A lot of chicken, which now we can get again. Before we couldn't get that, you know. Now, I mean, I would say for pork, we do probably the equal amount of beef and chicken, and then probably a third less of pork.
A third less. How do we raise that?
Get people believe it, you know. It's like, you should try this carne asadas. You should try these, you know. We build these big protein bowls in the morning for, like, breakfast, build your own protein bowls. There was like, well, bring double the bacon. Okay, well, you should try these breakfast crumbles that we make from scratch. They're super great, you know. Well, people don't like sausage. Well, that's the way it's made. You know, you got to try it in different applications, like he's telling you, and it's all about how it's prepared, I believe. And you know, when you make it differently than other people, like, wow, that is really good. You know. So we push different applications prepared the right way. Very good. You know, Tony can take a piece of pork blade steak and turn it into like a gourmet, you know, porterhouse that you're sitting there eating the way it's prepared. He makes this great Diane sauce with it, you know, and he puts it out there. And we just did this the other day for the fun of it because we had a company bring us in some pork products to try. So we were sitting there messing around with it, and it's just a good application to teach people, hey, there are different ways to prepare this. It's not how inexpensive this piece is, it's how it's prepared. Everybody's like, wow, you know, this was great. So
It is
good,
great.
for instance. Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask this question next to both of you. We obviously know that there are other competing proteins on the market that are not meat options. Joni, you especially, do you feel the pressure to provide those to your clientele? And how are you addressing that?
We do have a big call for this plant-based product, which it's tough to provide, because we can't get it in bulk products hardly at all. There's 2 or 3 that we can get. Otherwise, we have to go just buy it retail off of the grocery shelf, and it's very expensive for us. And it may be 30 or 40 people at a time that you're supplying it for, so it's very expensive, you know. And I have not been able to really find a good, like for turkey, for instance, I tried to special order like 20 roast for this one group I had. I ordered it way back in October. Just got it 2 weeks ago. That's how far behind they are. So you have to go out and source that through another like retailer and pay big money for it. And we need a good pork product for that.
Do you feel like that trend is going to continue, or do you feel like it's more of a buzz and it'll hit
hope
its
it's a
peak
buzz.
and fall off?
I hope it's a buzz.
Jim, do you have anything to add to the growing demand for meatless protein options?
Yeah, I mean, just in the last week or so, you're seeing a lot more published things about this is now considered a fad, not a trend. And
there's a difference.
In the latter part of last year, it was, no, this is going to be a trend. It's going to continue. People are willing to try it and stuff. What we've found in the meat case, certainly in terms of a ground-based type product, is that if you're going to tie up meat case space with it, then put it down on one end with the chicken and turkey, because the plant-based consumer is much closer aligned with them than they are with ground pork, sausage, or ground beef. Or, even better yet, that will help you with your shrink, get it out of the meat department. The people that are really, truly into this stuff, they don't want it hanging out next to the burger or the ground pork.
Well, it's not called the protein case.
Put it in the health
called the meat
department in the
case.
freezer, and reduce your shrink.
All right, do either of you have anything to add before we see if there are any questions from the audience?
No? Open it up to questions.
Is pork prominent today in the menu and in the meat case?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to grow, and that's what our job is to increase demand. We do a meat case study every 2 years where we have a doctor of meat science that goes across the country and goes to thousands of stores and evaluates the marbling, the color, the tenderness scientifically of samples from all of these particular stores, and then he compiles it all. And for the first time in several years of doing this, we are seeing pork loins, for instance, going back to better color scores and better marbling scores than they had, which is great for the industry because it says we're going in the right direction. We're going towards quality. And so as organizations that support the farmers, pig farmers every day, we need to be the ones that are out there carrying the message forward and really beating the drum. And in food service. It's really getting it in people's mouths. So.
All right, do we have any questions for our panelists today?
Yeah, thanks. So a couple basic questions, I guess. I've really enjoyed the Quick Trip promotions where they have the 99-cent bacon-wrapped loin. Just love that. But I've been curious. It says loin. Is it loin or is it tenderloin, just, on the inside?
I think it's a split loin. Yeah, I doubt that they would be able from that, even though they're big and they have their own meat plant that they're producing all of this stuff out of. That's an interesting backstory that a lot of people don't know about that organization is it's like, oh, we want to sell the lowest priced milk. And they go to their vendors, the people that produce milk and creameries and stuff, and they go, oh my God, there's no way we can touch that. And they go, okay, well, we're going to build a milk plant. And the same way with bottled water and bread. And if they could grow bananas, they probably would grow their own bananas. But yeah, so.
One other question. I was in Mankato a month or so ago, and in a large food service setting, had some of the best pork chops I've ever had in a food service setting, and it came from, I got to think now how they termed it, but it was I think they call it a rib chop or something, but anyway, obviously from the darker end of the loin, and I've never seen an institution that separated them out like that, and I'm thinking that as an industry, we should do that more. Right now, like my wife would like the light end of the loin, but I definitely like the darker end. And so often it's like, oh, you just take what you get. And it seems that our industry would benefit from differentiating that loin rather than just sending it all together. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm trying to think, 8 years ago, we had a nomenclature project that the National Pork Board got behind that really tried to change the naming, parallel the naming of what was out there in beef. So we got together with our friends across the barnyard, and primarily, so it was the lamb folks and the beef folks, and said, what do you have equity in? And they said, we want to own, steaks. What about, porterhouse, ribeye, New York? We don't really care so much about that. So we picked up that, and probably as an organization maybe didn't do as great of a job to get everybody to embrace it, because you kind of got to have the packer processors online so they're willing to do it in a case-ready product and or just cut it that way, because we have a tendency in this business to do things the same way we've done them for the last 40 years.
And I recall when that happened as well. I'm on the Minnesota Pork Board, so I was watching it pretty closely when that came out. But I'm thinking that was targeted towards bone-in cuts. And this meal that I had was a boneless chop, and it seems like it's probably done with bone-in chops, but not with boneless. Am I right on that, or?
No, actually, we had both.
Okay.
So we had an entire loin, and you could go up to the top, and those were all bone-in cuts, and down to the bottom were how do you get the same boneless cuts out of there. Yep.
I'd be interested in your reaction. What are there some cuts that are underutilized and undervalued through the meat case that we could put some emphasis on and enhance their value? What are the sleeping giants for us in terms of increasing the total value of that carcass?
I would say probably our next area of focus is going to be loin. It's just undervalued, and it's a huge part of the pig, so it drags down the overall cutout value. And we have opportunities there. We just need to figure out exactly how do we go to market with that strategy and get consumer acceptance. But is it the sizing? I mean, do you buy chops? Do you buy a half loin? Now you're seeing a lot of whole loins, but the consumer freaks out when, I'm buying a 6-pound loin and I don't know what to do with it. So is it something as simple as putting cutting directions on the back side of it of, here, you can make a roast out of this and you can make chops out of this part and cube these up for an application. And it probably will come also to working with packer processors on value-added cuts. How do we put them into forms that people actually use today? Because a lot of consumers may not want to touch raw meat, for instance, but if you gave them an 8-ounce package of strips or diced, ground, they'll handle that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm interested in your loin comment because I do a little work on the meat side as well, and the cut size is starting to, excuse the pun, a huge issue on the beef side too. And just to start cutting loins anywhere other than a cross section makes everybody nervous, but I think that's eventually what we're going to have to get.
Right, and you've seen a lot of, certified Angus beef is one where they're starting to split, the loins down just simply because they did get so big, and it's like I'm one of those kind of people that I'm not going to buy a quarter or a half-inch steak. That's just in the same way with a chop. If I want a chop, I want a chop that has some thickness to it. And can be cooked properly. That was one of the other things that predated the nomenclature, was if you're cooking whole muscle meats like the loin, 145-degree internal temperature, let it rest for 3 minutes, and you're going to have a good eating experience.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So, Jim, for you specifically, you'd mentioned that you go to a white table establishment and sometimes pork's presented as the affordable entry-level price point for folks. Is there anything that producers or retailers can do to, increase the appeal of pork as a high-quality meat, as an elegant meat, kind of shift the perception from, it's the most affordable thing in the meat case, but it can be really fancy. It can be very, very nice meat.
I think we can have both. It's really designing strategies and marketing strategies around raising that awareness, and how do you take that to a new level? It doesn't necessarily have to be the lowest. Why are people charging $70+ for steaks? Well, part of it has to do with the fact that their product costs have went up so dramatically, and our product costs are good value. So it's just like, I've always felt that they need to hedge their bets a little bit and, try to increase it. Don't jump from $20 to $40, but you certainly could probably put $5 on there and take home $5.
I have several questions, but one of them is just about, in the meat case, the ground pork, do they sell 90-10 next to 80-20, next to 85-15 for ground pork? Are they pretty detailed in terms of the nutritional value along with how things are prepared?
I would say yes, they are, and that's what the retailers that we're working with, that's what we're trying to drive home, is that put them all together and then, identify, what they are, and that, because a lot of people understand, we're the last of the party on that particular side of it, because beef had those attributes on their labels, and then turkey and chicken came on board. So people get it. They kind of understand what that fat to lean ratio is. We just need to do a better job on the packaging and that sort of a thing. And it probably will start at the store level where they will put it on there, and then it will spill down into the packer processors that'll go, oh, there's a demand for this, let's put it in a, in a different type of packaging that's much more readily available.
And then if I could, Carrie, is that your name?
Joni.
Joni, I'm sorry. So you had talked about, the grind products and sauce. You can make very lean sausage and it can be very tasty. Do you try to promote, or what kind of lean are you purchasing when you make these seasoned grind products?
Most of the time we buy shoulders or butts because we got to have a little fat in there. So that's where your flavor comes from, first of all, And then we have some really good blends that we have, the spices that we've made ourselves. We have a lot of rubs that I have produced over the years, and then I have them packaged for me down in Memphis, Tennessee by a big company down there. So
what would you say your ratio would be for that type of flavored sausage meat?
for breakfast sausage, is that what you're talking about?
Anything that you're adding flavor to make an interesting entree for your customers.
Well, a lot of them are not ground for a entree, an entree that you're going to do. We'll use that pretty much just for like our breakfast burritos, our breakfast protein bowls, or, something on that line. So I would say we use probably 20% ground versus, whole muscle meats.
And so would that be a 80-20?
Yeah, we use more fattier.
Okay.
We do in ours, just for the good flavor.
Right,
And the moistness.
right.
I mean, going back to my years as a sausage evangelist, kind of the target for most sausage is 70-30, because you want that fat, and then it's how you manipulate it. Unlike making a burger, you don't want that protein. When you add salt to it, it extracts the protein. You don't want that because it will start to bind it, and you'll get that bouncy kind of texture. But in a sausage, that's perfectly fine. That's kind of what you're looking for. And so I would say, and it's interesting because pork butts are nature's way of pretty much delivering that 70-30. Yep.
And I did have another question about, we raise hogs. I had a half, and I wanted to order the country ribs. And so just your comments about the St. Louis, the country. From what I understood, if you have the country ribs, you're taking away from the blade area, the shoulder. What do you lose if you have one cut versus the other? What's your comments about the pros and cons of each cut of ribs?
Well, country style ribs do come from the blade area, and then they can either be bone-in or boneless, but the bone-in has got part of the blade in it. The loin back ribs are what a lot of people refer to as baby back ribs,
Okay.
but that's actually Chili's song that's just stuck in everybody's mind. And then, so they sit on the top part attached to the spine down to the loin. And then right below the loin and where the tenderloin would be is where you would score and cut through in traditional processing. And below that are your full, not St. Louis, your full spares. And then if you trim the rib tips off and square that up, that's a St. Louis style.
So you could get all.
Yeah, you're not
all
really going to
forms of
sacrifice
ribs. Okay.
anything out of there. Maybe a little bit of loin on some of them, but it's been in the industry's name. I mean, loin back ribs oftentimes can be sold as extra meaty, and what they're doing is they're just simply, when they pull those ribs, they're taking some of the loin with it. Mm-hmm. And so, because they can get a lot more money for those loin backs than they can for the average loin at this particular time.
And then just as an appetizer or, competing with chicken wings or chicken nuggets, that type of thing, I don't see why we don't have the chop on a stick. And I don't know if that would come from the tenderloin, just a smaller portion of meat that's on a stick. Not a pork chop on a stick, but a smaller. Why is that not moving forward as an appetizer?
tenderloin's boneless. That's part of it. It's pretty hard to try to. You'd be sacrificing a lot to try to pull out some sort of a bone in order to have it attached to a tenderloin. There are pig wings out there, and so they're starting to gain some momentum in the industry.
And where does that cut come from?
Comes from the shank of the pig. So there's 3 bones in the shank, and then they pull the bones out, and so it kind of looks like a little lollipop. And the company that makes those, they have them in like 2 ounce, 4 ounce, and now they're doing like a full size one that's more, looks like ossobuco, if you're familiar with that. So it's kind of almost like a pre-cooked full shank that could be fried, it can be smoked, it can be baked.
All right, we have one more question.
We've been talking about consumption in general. Mine is a little bit more specific. I'm curious to know what your experiences have been with regard to our younger consumers, good, bad, and different, what you've seen, what you've explored, how that's turned out. And the reason I ask is I have 2 daughters, and my youngest loves pork. And every time we go to a restaurant, there is nothing on the kids' menu. There's no pulled pork sandwich. There's no pork loin sandwich. And we went to the county fair. She had a pork loin sandwich, loved it. You can't find it anywhere. So I'm curious what we've been doing in that space and what that's looked like for you, and has it been positive, or what's kind of come of it?
I think, Joni, first, what would you say challenges might be on what you've experienced in your businesses of pork options for children?
We sell a lot of the little kids' pork sliders at the fair, a lot of those. And even like in special weddings and things like that, they want something smaller for kids. They'll be like, what can we offer? Chicken tenders? What about pulled pork sliders? Or we smoke our loin and shave it down, and we make like a little nice slider for them. So we do utilize a lot of the pork in the kids' aspects, but in smaller serving portions, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So we try to utilize as much as we can.
Jim, do you have anything to add to that on just like a larger scale of food service?
I would say that in retail, for people that either have kids or for just the younger generations, they're much more into ethnic than they ever were. When I grew up, it was like you maybe had some Chinese food, you maybe had some Italian food, and you may have had some Mexican food. You didn't have micro cuisines, and they didn't have YouTube and TikTok and Google and all of these sorts of things. Unfortunately, having said that, my 20-year-old used to eat 2 pounds of bacon every day, and now he doesn't eat red meat. So I got that going for me. But it's a slow converting process back.
I would say kind of just based on your question and based on your question about appetizers or small servings, I think pork nuggets is something we've talked about a lot in the last couple of years as an industry. And the hurdle is typically the processing side of things. Being willing to take that extra step at the processing level to create that product. I don't think that it's necessarily that it didn't do well. It's getting that product to market. I don't know, Jim, if you have anything to add to that. It's fine if you don't. I know it's something that we've talked about.
No, I remember
for a couple
there
years.
was a chain that offered pork fingers, and they basically kind of stole the idea from Popeyes for those wicked strips that they did. So what they were, instead of a chicken breast that they cut into random strips and battered and then fried, they did the same thing with a pork loin. And, for people that do hand breading, the one challenge that you may face with a large chain that does a lot of volume, that sort of a thing, is the fact that if they have a subset of consumers that don't want pork, do you do a different breading station for your pork, that kind of a thing. But it's definitely got legs and could be fabricated from a ton of different products or a ton of trim, so to speak, in the industry. So when they're cutting certain stuff and they have this trim, why aren't they converting that into something that could be used as an appetizer